We're going to take a look at some more bends, one on the first string and the 8th fret on the second string, and where to go from there. When we bend the second string at the 8th fret, I pointed out in a previous lesson that it's best not to aimlessly wander back down the scale to this note, although it is playable of course, but I recommended going from this bend to the first string, which is the same note, with a little mini bar in place, and then back down the scale this way. I believe I call this the connector because it actually connects you back into the scale, and particularly into some of those nice melodic phrases in the mid-range. Now, if you're doing some fast runs, particularly some of these run-offs that go all the way down the scale and all the way back, if you want to continue from that bend, you can go straight into the connector and throw in some more dynamic leads. This way you don't have to stop for too long on the second string. So I may, for example, go and that way just keep things running along with the music without having to stop. Once again, go to the connector notes. I would highly recommend here that instead of using your individual fingertip with your first finger and then crossing that over to the second string, what I would do is slap down that mini bar. You'll find it helps in the smoothness going into these dynamic leads. Now, a new note I want to show you today is to take this note here, which was one of our first notes in the pentatonic scale, at least in terms of when we first learnt the pattern, and we're going to learn how to bend this note. Now, two things come to mind. First of all, it's rather awkward. If you have heavy strings, it's quite a difficult bend. And the other thing is, what do you do after you've played that bend note? Where do you go from there? Well, let me point out that if you're soloing over a chord progression, let's say it's just two chords like this that I've been jamming along to lately, when you bend here over the A minor, that is a very high passing note. And of course when the D chord comes up, that bend, which is a D, now becomes a chord note. So typically, one way of treating this high bend is to bend it up and hold it with some pedaling notes. So we may go like this, for example, and then we have to figure out how to resolve out of there back into this portion of the scale, which is what I intended to show you now. So first of all, let's get to this bend through the connector. I'll take a 3-note dynamic pattern, round it off to a bend, into the connector, and now I bend here. Now, it's optional whether you bend with 3 fingers, with your 3rd finger sitting on the note, or your little finger and all 4 bending. It's possibly a matter of taste. There's some benefits to using the little finger in that when you come down, that is the finger you usually associate with playing some of these notes, particularly if you do some very fast dynamic leads, which we're going to learn soon on these 2 strings. But anyway, I digress. Back to the bend. We bend up here, and we can pedal on this note. Now, there are several ways of getting back, as I mentioned earlier, into this scale. Here are several now. After you've done a pedal, do another bend, and then drop the bend down. So it's really like a bend up and down, back to the 5th fret, down the scale to the 8th fret 2nd string, back to the 1st, and wind up with a bend. Now, to hear that properly, I should play it up to speed. One more time. And slow down. I'm avoiding the pedaling here just to get to where we go to. 5th fret, 2nd, quickly back to the 1st string, followed by a bend. Continuing on, another way out of this bend is to mute the string with the right hand, that is, place your thumb on the string to shut off all the sound. I bend, I can pedal. When I'm ready, I mute. That allows me to drop the bend down without any sound being heard. Then I hit the 8th fret, 1st string, then the 5th fret, 1st string, and I do a hammer-on and pull-off. Like this. Mute, drop back. Now that's only half the phrase. Let's continue on. Down to the 8th fret, 2nd string, back to the 1st. Notice I'm keeping my mini bar down. Back to the 8th, and pull off. Now up to speed, this is quite effective. And it's quite difficult too, I might add. So let's take a look at it a little slower. Pedal, mute, drop back, 8th, 5th, hammer on and pull off. That means you only pick it once at the 5th. And hammer on and pull off. Onto the 2nd string, pick, back to the 1st string, pick, back to the 2nd string, pick, and pull off. You can see now I'm assigning my little finger to this string and my 3rd to this string. It's rather awkward doing that. Or if I was bending this way, I mean it can be done, but you'll have to decide what works for you. I personally prefer to use my little finger for this string, my 3rd for that one. And then of course when I go around like this, if I want to do some dynamic phrases, I will use my little there as opposed to my 3rd finger here. So let's take a look. Bend, down the connector, some high pedals. That was our first example. And then again, connector, high pedal, mute. And that was our second example. Now, when we get to here, with a mini bar in place, conveniently, we can run off a whole pile of those nice dynamic phrases. And we can more or less keep everything running however we feel like it. Now, another thing to consider when bending this 1st string is instead of coming back into the scale this way, using some of those ideas we just discussed, we could go from here, mute the string with the right hand, and move up to this position. Now, of course, ideally, if we're in this position, we may have wanted to have done our bend with our 3rd finger, because then we have our 3rd finger ready for our phrases in the pentatonic with the familiar fingering. But of course, don't worry, if you are bending with your little finger and you want to move, you just simply move up, and when your 3rd finger is level with the 10th fret, you can conclude any phrases you want here. Once again, the main idea is to pedal on this note. Mute, move up. And as discussed in previous lessons, if you want to get out of here, slowly we can go from there to the 8th fret to our 3rd finger down this way, if we're not playing too fast, or straight to the 5th fret, and some of these combinations here. Let me just demonstrate now what I've just shown you with some backing music.